Hi, I'm Ryder Hask, and this is the People's TV Podcast.
There was a point when they were starting to build out the video department when I was the only video person. And I vividly remember sitting at the New Yorker offices alone, like with a video camera and Premiere, and being like, where am I? And like, can I talk to someone? And so I sent an email to a bunch of folks who were in similar positions at Vox and Time and the New York Times. And I was like, guys, let's come together and let's talk about what we're all doing, because the people within that group were making really influential stuff that was appearing in people's Facebook feeds and on these publications' websites. And so that's how VC started. I sent an email and I was like, let's call it a producer's circle.
That's my friend Sky Dylan-Robbins. Sky's an award-winning documentary filmmaker and the executive director of the Video Consortium. Since founding the Video Consortium in 2015, Sky has built a vast and diverse community of nonfiction filmmakers by hosting screenings, events, and workshops in cities across the US and around the world. VC also has a ton of resources for nonfiction filmmakers, like a mentorship program and a jobs forum, and so much more that helps our industry continue to produce and publish impactful stories. In this episode, Sky shares her origin story and what led her to become a filmmaker and a nonprofit founder. We also discuss some of VC's new projects and reflect on Sky's remarkable feature documentary, On Our Own Island. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, Sky, great to see you.
Likewise, Ryder.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm really excited to talk with you about so many different things. VC, your film, the industry in general, nonfiction filmmaking and documentary. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear your origin story of where you grew up, and just your sort of coming of age years.
Sure. Well, I think it's worth saying coincidentally and super serendipitously that we actually knew each other when we were toddlers and grew up down the street from each other in Tribeca. So that's a magical thing to note. But yeah, so I was born and raised in New York City. Really grateful to have been raised in an environment where people are different and can be themselves and can all come together through their own, differences and just thrive together. Had a pretty alternative upbringing, went to a Waldorf School, which is kind of like a Montessori school where screens are actually not allowed. And it was very artsy, and my very type A parents kept me on track. And went to Northwestern for film school. I don't know how many details I should add.
No,
did
that's
ballet, went to film school. My first job was at Tumblr because I was really into entrepreneurial things and wanted to learn how the media intersects with that. And I ended up kind of founding an editorial department within Tumblr, and I did the video stuff there. And then Yahoo bought it, and I was asked to come over to the New Yorker, and I helped build their video strategy for, I was there for 4 years and worked on short docs and with the writers to develop shorts and series, and then went over to NBC and helped start a doc unit there and worked across broadcast and digital and in all of those silos. And along the way started this crazy thing called the Video Consortium, and now do that full time.
Amazing. Yeah, obviously you covered a ton of ground there. But I would love to just take it back to those early years, because, having the origin story to me is just like such a special thing to talk about, because I think people really just appreciate knowing where those like original ideas came from, or all of the stuff that, just tells the context for who you are and what you've built. So I'm just really curious. You mentioned the Waldorf School. No screens. That's incredible. Talk about your like influences at that time. This is the 90s. This is downtown Manhattan. What was going on? What was the scene?
Sure. Well, I think it's worth saying my mom was a journalist herself, and Emmy Award-winning journalist who worked at NBC actually 40 years before I did. And so I grew up with her as a role model. in terms of using the media to awaken people, hopefully, and you know, create, inform and inspire, and at the same time having this kind of somewhat sheltered existence within Waldorf education, which, for context, basically is an educational system that goes beyond just the technical, beyond the math and the reading and the science, and really instills in children this idea of bringing kind of, not to sound too woo-woo, but heart and soul to everything that you do and to helping those around you. And I think that also feeds into the Video Consortium and why I started that as well. But yeah, New York in the 90s was amazing. And I feel so lucky to, I mean, one day I'll do the opposite and I'll interview you, but I think we would both agree that New York is a magical place. And in the 90s, when things were really, I don't know, thriving kind of, and people weren't looking at their screens all the time when they walked down the street, there was a vibe. What do you think, Ryder?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, some of the highlights for me, just thinking about how it would seem so unusual now, is going to elementary school. I went to PS3, which is on Christopher and Greenwich, or no, Christopher and Hudson. And for starting in the 4th grade, we were allowed to go out for lunch. And I mean, there's little guys, you know, little kids going out by themselves in the neighborhood. And that, I think, was just sort of one of the features of New York City in the 90s. It just felt like very safe.
It did.
We had this like free range parenting, free range children still going on, where I feel like today they would certainly not let kids wander around Christopher Street or any part of New York City for that matter at that super young age.
Agreed. And I had recess every day in Central Park.
Oh, you did?
You know? Yeah. And I remember running around, and it was, different time. It's amazing how, I guess 20 years, what that will do, and how things will change as a result.
Yeah, I just remember there was a health food store, there was a video store, there was the place where you get smoked mozzarella in little parks, and that was the scene, that was the vibe.
Totally, very like handcrafted kind of.
Yes.
You know?
So tell me more about your college experience. So you did go to film school and study film. Was that the trajectory?
I did. My pre-K through 12th grade experience was no screens, never picked up a camera, like didn't do that high school experimentation stuff that most film kids did. And my high school was 23 kids. And so going to Northwestern, which is in Chicago, where my class was like 2,500 people, was an eye-opening experience, and so magical, because it was there, I think, that I really found myself. And I was able to find, New York City is big, but when I got to college, I don't know, for me, I was able to find different people who were doing different things in an academic environment, and that was really special. And I ended up starting or co-running this media like student group called Inspire Media, that helped basically was all about like video through social change. And I think that was also just very aligned with my personal trajectory. But yeah, it was awesome. I did crew. I was the coxswain for the men's varsity crew team. All the guys were scared of me, ha ha ha, and definitely knew how to steer a boat. And yeah, it was fun.
I love that. It certainly seems like direct training for any leadership position where you really need to demand a lot and also be gentle at the same time.
Totally. Indeed.
And any notable like professors or other connections with students that really helped define that era for you?
Yeah, actually, great questions. There was this one professor, Deborah Tolchinsky, who was my doc professor. And she's actually a member of the Video Consortium now, which is wild. And she was wonderful. And I made my first like short documentary about this amazing pizza place in Italy, in Chicago. And yeah, she was really influential, and I learned a lot of the art of doc from her. How true stories you can create these magical experiences and share it with people through that, So yeah.
Amazing. Is that pizza film somewhere on the internet or
It might be. I have to find it. But the place is still there. It's called Spaccanapoli, and they import all of their stuff from Naples and different parts of Italy. And it was nice to have my first shoots and then be able to eat really good pizza afterwards. So that was a very wonderful introduction.
Couldn't ask for better crafty on set.
Totally.
So along that way, was there a moment where you felt the draw of being an entrepreneur in addition to being a filmmaker?
I think, well, my parents were both entrepreneurs, and so I'm grateful to have grown up in an environment where they really instilled in me this idea of be helpful to other people, but don't care what they think and stand up for what is right always, And I was always the kid who raised my hand in the room as a kid and whatnot. And so I think I've always just been very interested in helping to start things and to drive change and to not be afraid to step apart from the crowd, so to speak. And so, no, I think at that point I was still just finding the tools, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like back then, even the phrase social entrepreneurship was pretty rare.
I think so. Yeah. An evolution,
That's awesome, and it's so important, I think, to have parents that are supportive of that kind of creative thinking. I'd say creativity and entrepreneurship, they have a lot in common in terms of the problem solving, the expression of an idea, or finding solutions. I've certainly, taken the same sort of path in that regard of trying to combine the two as much as I can, and sprinkle on a bit of the social entrepreneurship sauce of that as well, which I think is important for filmmakers in the documentary space for sure.
100%. And as you've done with Nick and People's TV, it's like, you gather these tools and then you, I think it's also about being bold and having the courage to step out and be like, okay, I have this vision. How can we accomplish it in this very crazy world? I mean, you guys have done that, right? So
Trying, work chip away at it every day.
Nothing good is easy, I think.
That's right. So I grew up reading The New Yorker, mostly the cartoons, but it was on the table every week in my household. And I always thought it would be incredible to work with them or do something with them. So curious to hear more about that experience of being in the writer's room, the editing room, in that very prestigious publication. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was amazing. I learned about the art and craft and practice, so to speak, of journalistic integrity, and had video skills, but through the amazing people who worked there, and kind of mentors and writers and folks who I looked up to, was able to weave into it that idea of ethics and craft and how to tell a really good story. I was the first video only hire there, and so there were some multimedia folks who are great and close friends, and we were just on this adventure of working with this storied brand and thinking about how to bring it into the future. And so I worked with Francois Mouly, the head of the art department, and I remember we launched on Snapchat, and I was like, okay, what's the cover this week? Let's look and see all the different drafts. And when the cartoonist would come in for their weekly meetings, hey, how's it going? What are you thinking about? And so it was this balance of traditional video, doc storytelling, and also new media and how to digitally uplift the stories that were happening there, as well as the behind the scenes things. And it was not easy the whole time. It's like you work with these amazing storied writers who have their stories correct or have their stories down. And I remember a lot of conversations where I would sit in the offices of these staff writers, like with my Converse, right, being like, so, and they'd be like, why do we need a video? I'm putting it all on paper. I'm like, no, we're going to do an additional thing that will enhance the story and not overlap with what you do. And so it was a bit of an exciting challenge, I would say. And it was also when video was just coming onto the scene. This was like for digital news publications, and that's how VC started. It's like news outlets were realizing that like video is such a powerful medium. What can we do to get our readers and viewers to understand stories that way? And so it was happening at the New Yorker, and it was also happening in all of these different publications. And it was like a magical kind of free-for-all moment. 2013 to 2016-ish.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it was really exciting, and experimentation was a big thing that people were embracing.
Yeah, I had a similar, very much more junior experience, but had some parallels in my student newspaper. When I was at GW, I was the first person to get the video camera out and start taking, clips of little interviews and just very basic stuff at first. But similar experience in that I would be talking to the writers and looking at the story budget for the week and figuring out what would be good for video, and certainly hearing the pushback of like, what are you doing with this camera?
Right.
Why are we,
Right.
This was back when printing the newspaper was the thing. The website was so far behind in terms of it being a real audience for them. So yeah, it was pioneering days, and I always look back at it and think, wow, if we had only chosen YouTube instead of blip.tv, there would be a terrific archive back then. But as you said, it was very much the early days, and a lot of the platforms that were going on back there, don't exist anymore. Totally. Yeah, it's interesting to see how all of those organizations over the past decade basically have really embraced it and created this whole new sort of sub-industry or full-on industry of that kind of storytelling.
100%. I remember when I first started at the New Yorker, we were on Bright Cove, which was what Condé Nast was using. I don't know if you know. It was another one of those things.
Yeah.
Anyway, the upload experience was not fun.
Bright Cove. Yeah. It's just funny to think about YouTube as a place where, like, back then no one thought it was legitimate, or they just didn't even see it as
Totally
a viable platform.
It's fascinating. It's amazing how, and then it just goes to the whole AI conversation and everything that's happening right now. We go through these periods as an industry, I guess as a world, where it's just like what the Wild West, and then coming together, and then the Wild West again, and it coming together. And that was definitely a time.
Yeah. I definitely want to talk about AI at some point. But first, I'd love to continue the linear narrative here and talk about what happened after the New Yorker. Was that the beginning of VC, or when did that come into existence?
Nick Thompson, who is now the CEO of The Atlantic, when he was the editor-in-chief of NewYorker.com, he hired me. And there was a point when they were starting to build out the video department when I was the only video person. And I vividly remember sitting at the New Yorker offices alone. Not alone, but at my desk alone, like with a video camera and Premiere, and being like, where am I? And like, can I talk to someone about, because I was surrounded by people who told stories, and obviously story unites us all, but the medium of video is quite different. And so I was like, damn it, I feel kind of lonely, and I want to talk to other people who are doing this at other places too. And so I sent an email to a bunch of folks who were in similar positions at Vox and Time and the New York Times and I think The Guardian and a bunch of independent doc filmmakers, because I knew like 20 people. And I was like, guys, let's come together and let's talk about what we're all doing, because the people within that group were making really influential stuff that was appearing in people's Facebook feeds and on these publications' websites. And so that's how VC started. I sent an email and I was like, let's call it a producer's circle of some kind. And we got together, I think in late 2014 or early 2015 at a bar in the East Village called The Scratcher, kind of a journalisty haunt. We sat at a back table and I remember saying like, let's all go around the table and introduce each other or introduce ourselves to each other. And it went really well and people really vibed with it. And I started a Facebook group. I said, let's keep in touch. And then we met again the next month. They brought their friends. We moved to Eric Brond had, who's a longtime VC member who's outgrown VC in a sense. He almost doesn't do video anymore. He had a studio in Brooklyn, and we screened a bunch of stuff, really great pieces. Posey Tang, who's now the EP of, I think the executive editorial producer at ABC News, and when she was still at the New York Times as a video journalist. That was the first piece we ever screened. And and it just kept evolving. We kept meeting monthly. More people kept joining. Someone moved to LA, started an LA chapter. The rest is history, I guess.
Amazing. Well, let's get into that history. I have very fond memories of my first VC, which I believe was at the NPR studio, where they have like a screening room.
Yeah.
And it was just, it made so much sense at the time. It was just this like natural extension because we, kind of cut our teeth in co-working spaces of other filmmakers. So it was always like easy access to other creatives doing different stuff. But when we went to that screening, it was like, oh, well, here's a whole nother set of people outside of our immediate world, but doing very similar work that I should know and that I want to watch stuff with and like learn from and just have that sense of community with.
Yeah.
So that was really special. So you started in a bar with 5 people or something like that. And then you had the LA chapter and
then DC, Gabriela Garcia Pardo, who led the way with the DC crown.
Yes. And then from there, what happened next? Did it just sort of start to exponentially grow or just catch on by word of mouth?
Yeah. It's all, we've never actually, in the history of VC, we've never done any kind of marketing or pushes for membership. It's all happened through word of mouth. And, for context, the Video Consortium today is a global nonprofit media organization that supports and connects, at this point, over 4,000 video journalists and nonfiction filmmakers in 300 cities and 50-ish countries and 6 continents. And our goal is to democratize the industry, to bring people together, to support people, to create work that impacts and inspires and, changes this crazy world of ours. And, when it started, it had that ethos too. It was like, can we connect people so that they can collaborate more and create content that changes people's minds and informs people with journalistic integrity too. I would never have imagined that I would be not making content, but more facilitating content at this point. And I would never go back, actually, because I love it so much. And because it's super fulfilling. I did VC like full-time, part-time in a sense, while I was at the New Yorker, and it just continued to grow organically. And we launched different chapters in different cities around the world as the months and years went by. And, it was built upon this kind of grassroots, community-focused passion from video journalists and filmmakers around the world who believed in it. And we've been able to grow thanks to the cajillions of hours of, time and talent and blood and sweat and tears from so many people around the world. It was, I was basically doing it part-time with the New Yorker, and a bunch of other people started to come on to help. And then I went over to NBC and kept working on it. And I've got to say, I don't usually say this, but it was really hard. Like it was really tough because it kept growing, and all I'll say is that it was hard, to maintain it. And it just reached a point. We became a 501c3 in 2017. everyone had been doing everything for free, and we continued to. And then the pandemic hit. My department at NBC was sunsetted, as things go. And I had an opportunity to go into a different department at NBC, but decided that VC was at this critical point, and I was like, damn it, now or never. And because people were asking for things, and we were getting to this point where we weren't able to deliver. And so kind of jumped ship and started to think about how we could make it an official operation so that it can continue and be sustainable, and so that we can provide more resources for people and creators around the world,
Well, I'm glad you made that call, especially knowing that when things are hard, it's not always the clear right option. And yeah, I think it was just such a good sign that you didn't have to do any marketing, because, I mean, word of mouth means that you're really adding value, and you've got something good. And so it's just about stoking that little flame as much as you can. So talk about some of the programs, and maybe a little bit of like the core mission. I know you described it, but what does that mean? Is it the screenings? And I know there's a few other programs that you're running. So what's the sort of portfolio of activities you're doing right now?
Sure. Well, VC obviously started in New York, and a bunch of our membership is still in New York, but a bunch of our membership is still in the US, but we also have a growing number of members who are in Latin America and throughout Africa and a bunch of different regions. And the goal really, I mean, if we think about the changing nature of the industry, I mean, obviously it's always changing, but as companies come and go, and as media outlets pivot and change, as streamers come onto the scene, and there's this constant shift as creative people kind of go into companies and then leave and go freelance and independent. There really isn't a place, especially there hasn't been a place for nonfiction people to be able to have a constant home that they can rely on, that they know that they can find support in, and a community of people. And that's what VC aims to be, just this constant amidst this continual sea change. And at the same time, we're seeing right now that, just because you get your film into a good film festival doesn't mean it's going to get sold. Just because you have a job doesn't mean you're going to get to keep it, or you're going to want to keep it. And so there are old systems in place right now in the industry. And I think that we're beginning to see a paradigm shift of some kind, where people are thinking, okay, or we're seeing people say, okay, these old models are not really working. Festivals are great, but maybe they're not like the be all end all. There have to be other ways where we can deliver these amazing stories to the public. And so we're really thinking about innovative ways that we can support people to bring their work to life. And we're doing that through mentorship programs. We have some incubators going on in partnership with some film festivals and not. We have, job boards and job exchanges, and ways for people to connect with each other, because obviously connections are so key in this industry. And at the same time, the idea is like, how can we rise above connections and get people what they need based on like story and craft and merit. And we're doing one project that I'm super excited about is it's called the Solution Storytelling Project. The Skoll Foundation, Jeff Skoll, the eBay guy, so the Skoll Foundation is funding it, and we are pairing filmmakers based in East and West and South Africa with nonprofits that are doing really great work in their regions, and they're telling solutions-focused stories about them. And the idea is that then the short docs are going to be published, and these filmmakers are going to get wider recognition, and so will the nonprofits. And so it's like, how do we use media to create social change? And yeah, a bunch of other stuff. I mean, we're really grateful to have been to have been able to get support from, at this point, in the past couple of years, we've grown so much, from the MacArthur Foundation, from the Knight Foundation, from the New York State Council on the Arts. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not a struggle, but we are on a path at least to be able to at least continue what we're doing and keep expanding, so to speak, and serve people around the world.
Yeah, that's incredible. So as a leader in a nonprofit, and I imagine, other folks who are interested not just in film, but in the impact work you just described, talk about your operations there, especially since so much of the local chapters are sort of self-guided and require so much volunteer, sweat equity work. How do you motivate your teams? How do you keep everything organized? How are you, being the coxswain of the VC ship?
Totally. Great question, Ryder. Well, it's this interesting balance because so many nonprofits run on, I guess it's the norm in a sense for a lot of nonprofits to run thanks to volunteers and people who are passionate about the mission. And we're just the same, like we wouldn't be anywhere without, the people all around the world who are keeping VC going. What we've been able to do and what's been necessary is for us to hire a core team that is able to keep the operations going so that we can support our local teams of folks who are creating programming and events around the world. And I think, at the same time, we've also seen the need to, like VC used to be all about events, it's about bringing people together, screenings or whatever. And we've transitioned as well into like a digital space so that we can further be able to democratize, level the industry playing field, give people access no matter where they are. Like if we don't have a chapter in some town, and there's a filmmaker or a journalist there who needs help, like now we have the resources to be able to give them at least connections and opportunities. So it's been an interesting kind of adventure to build a company or build a nonprofit, build an organization, and also make sure that we're scaling, that it's done in a healthy and sustainable way so that we can keep going and have this balance of, listening to the community and making sure that we're delivering and making sure that we are reaching people in the way and also changing with the industry too, because the industry keeps changing. And also making sure that we're creating systems that can be iterated on and continued, because I'm not going to be doing this for my entire life, probably until I'm 100. And so I want to make sure that VC can stay, and I want to make sure that that the mission can keep going. And so we're at that building foundational stage right now. And it's exciting.
Yeah. So is that what you're focusing on? Just the operations behind the scenes, all the nuts and bolts? And we like to use the analogy of fixing the plane while flying it, but is that where you guys are at?
Yeah, man, totally. Building the plane while flying it, and certainly fixing things along the way. Yeah. I mean, my favorite thing is just sitting down with like our members and talking about what's up and how they can be supported more. But there's a lot of, as you run a business, like there's a lot of admin involved, and there's a lot of intricacies that people would never even consider that you have to do. And so my roles span like operations, fundraising, programming. It's just like thinking about the whole thing and how we can make it work.
I can only imagine how many VC email accounts you've had to make over the years.
We have a lot. But I will say I'm so grateful to so many people who have played a really big role. Like Henny Hawasley, who's our director of strategic operations, he really helped build a system where, technically on the back end, we're able to manage. We have teams in all these different countries and members in all these different countries. And so it's like, how do you make sure that we're organized while continuing to expand, I guess,
Yeah. And even just being on the same language is hard enough. let alone the same
Totally.
platform and all the rest of it.
Totally. Totally. It's exciting. But that's like, I'm super grateful that, like I pumped out content, like I was a video journalist. I was a one-man band, one-woman band. And I'm most excited. Like I came into the New Yorker when video wasn't quite a thing. And we was able to like help start something from scratch at NBC. And I think what I'm most excited about for VC is like building these systems and thinking about how we can innovate and make cool new things that support people. Like that's really exciting to me. More than just like I don't want to like just run a company or run an organization. I want to build stuff that helps people.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, I want to talk about the Pay Transparency Project. I mean, that's
Sure.
certainly a way that you're directly helping people. It's always tricky to talk about money, especially as a freelancer and trying to navigate your career. So what is the Pay Transparency Project?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. So the Pay Transparency Project is essentially a grassroots, community-driven database that tracks, it's paytransparencyproject.org, that tracks what people are paid at different media organizations. And it isn't necessarily I was paid this and this is what you should be paid. It's like, this is what I was paid. And then you can see what people are paid across different companies. And so as a freelancer, when you go to the website and you see the database of reports of how people were paid and for what, then you can make your own deductions, so to speak, of what an industry norm is. So Rebecca Davis, who started played a really big role in starting NBC News Digital, also was the first person, I believe, to launch the union at NBC News. She was kind of the first person who I talked to about this, and we a few years ago, and we were talking about how there are all of these spreadsheets kind of secretly moving around on the internet that people were sharing with each other of rates. And there wasn't a place where people could go to like find a solid place where people could find what people were being paid. And so the idea was to create a home in a sense for that, or an ongoing home. And so we worked on it, kind of let it lay low as things were getting kind of crazy. And then we talked to Brown Girls Doc Mafia, which is an amazing community in the doc space as well. In I think a year or two ago, and we decided to partner on it to really bring it up in the world. And so the Pay Transparency Project is now a partnership with Brown Girls Doc Mafia, and we're bringing in other partners like Forward Doc and BIPOC doc editors and a bunch of other really amazing folks. And the idea is for the industry to kind of come together and encourage people to report what they're being paid. And from that, in a year or two, we'll all take a look at the findings and make some presentations about what the deal is. And then hopefully from there, we can create more transparency and more equity and sustainability for people who are working in this space.
Amazing. And so is it basically it's like anonymous, right? So you would upload as much information as you want to the database, so it can be looked at by anyone who visits the site, and then from there you would sort of deduce based on role what you might want to ask for the next time you go to a client on a freelance project or talk with a publisher or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very simple submission system. It gets approved by someone internally, and then it goes into the public database, and you can search by role or by company, and it's very much ongoing. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to check it out and add a recent rate of yours.
Did this get inspired by another industry that's doing this? I'm not educated on it, so I'm curious if you were looking at, another industry that was like putting this as a priority or had a association or some org that was doing something similar?
Yeah, there was writers. There's a similar database, and I actually forget what it's called. But there are a bunch of writers databases that show what different companies pay per word.
Mm.
And in this ridiculous industry of ours, nonfiction and doc and video, where it's a complete free for all in
Yeah.
terms of how people are paid and for what,
Hmm.
we were thinking, wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah, I can imagine the actors would be interested in this as
I
well,
think
because
so
that's
too.
another place,
I,
theater or film or wherever.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And we actually just got a recent inquiry from someone working in music and music
Mm.
supervision, and they wanted to know how it was built and how they could create something similar. So there's obviously a waves happening in this where people want to dig a bit deeper, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically part of the gig economy, right? That folks who are not at full-time salary jobs are trying to figure this stuff out and need as much help as they can get, regardless of industry.
Totally, because there really isn't any support for these folks. I mean, people are or have been kind of alone on an island, and um, obviously the idea is that we can create. I mean, that's the point of VC, and that's the point of these systems that we're trying to create, hoping to create for people. You know,
So on this topic of the landscape, as you mentioned earlier, rapidly changing all the time. We just saw the bankruptcy of Vice, which blew my mind.
me too.
Also, big layoffs or drawbacks at other media publishers, independent and otherwise. What do you think that means for video journalists and documentary filmmakers?
Good question. Big question. Um, I think that it means that we need to come together towards a better way of doing things. The money's there, you know, and it's just a matter of how to ensure that it goes into the right places to get these stories told. Um, we're seeing, as you said, all of these kind of storied companies just go through these massive changes and die in some capacity, and people are getting their news in different ways, and so there's a reordering of the system. And no one, I think, to even say I think it's going to be like this or I envision this, is no one can say that. But what we can say is that there are, and also AI is happening, and that's a whole other situation, especially when it comes to video. But I mean, I feel pretty confident saying that AI can't craft a nuanced, at least at this point, right? Like a nuanced story with emotion that has these like intricacies that only a human with heart can. And so, you know, there's so many brilliant people out there, and we just need to connect the dots to be able to get them to connect the creators with the makers, so to speak, with the people who are the takers, the people who are taking the stories, and get the money there. And we're working on a bunch of different things that can hopefully do that, but certainly is going to need some major um, bravery, I think, from a lot of people in the industry to realize what lies ahead, in a sense, because all of the systems are changing. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
what do
and I
you
think
think?
there's well, I mean, I think there's some. It's a double-edged sword the way I see the publishing space when it comes to video.
Yeah,
Obviously, you have advertising, which has been around forever. Video is a terrific medium for advertising, also for journalism and storytelling.
yep,
And there's definitely been this sort of blending of those two worlds where it's not just the pre-roll or the commercials, but it's the content and itself that is the branded content now.
yep,
Um, so that to me is where it starts to get really tricky. Of course, we did see a lot of stuff like that made by Vice. I think I'm not super familiar, but folks like the Atlantic and the New Yorker and others are a little bit more cautious
hmm,
about doing that kind of stuff.
yeah.
But I'd love to hear your take on when you say the money is there. Are we talking about branded content? Is that how we're making it, or are we purely making money off of clicks and eyeballs and pre-roll? Where do we kind of revive the industry in a way that maintains its integrity?
Totally. I mean, I certainly don't have all the answers, but in any capacity, but what I'm seeing are these different models where there is that pre-roll, there is that whole ad space, the branded space, but then there's also, I mean, I'm a journalistically leaning creative. You know, some folks are more less that. I really do believe in personally separating editorial from branded and all of that stuff, and it's an important place, but I think that it has an important place, but I think there's room for both. And foundation money is a thing. Individual financiers are a thing. There are places and people that want to see journalism thrive, and they just need to be connected to the people who have those stories, and then make sure that they're seen on a wide scale. And so there's like all of these different like stakeholders, and I see VC also as a mechanism to be able to connect different people, and that's, I mean, I know that sounds a little nebulous, but they're all there. We just need to think about the new scaffolding that will bring us into the future, and also make sense for how people consume the news these days, because also with the younger generation, not that we're old, but you know, Gen Z consumes their news in a totally different way than our parents did, so worlds away. And so it's like, how do we reach people and also give them what they don't know they want?
That's a good way to phrase it. Well, I think, you know, this has been something we've been doing a lot of working on internally, and have found that there's no like clean answer to it. It just seems like if money is involved with the project, influence is right there with it. And
Totally.
you know, I appreciate, you know, your sort of more purist approach to the documentary ethics of it. On the other hand, you know, is that going to sustain all 4,000 of these VC members and beyond?
No.
Yeah. So how do we balance those sort of competing interests of the brands that want, you know, the talent, and the stories that want an audience, and vice versa?
Totally. I mean, the through line of members of the video consortium is that everyone is a professional media maker, and that they work on nonfiction content. But by far, so many loads of our members also, you know, their bread and butter is branded content, or they do ads, or, you know, commercials and whatnot. And so I think that there's a place for a person to be able to wear many hats in different situations. And also, though, at the same time, I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but we're seeing, there have been so many articles written about like how documentary is changing, and how, you know, Frankenbiting and all of the different ways that doc is becoming more commercial. And I think there's a place for that, but we also just need to, as the medium keeps evolving, create ways to let people know what they're watching. Again, I do have a bit of a purist approach in that I like, when I was at the New Yorker, because I was kind of raised there journalistically, I wasn't allowed to talk to the marketing people, like wasn't allowed to go on the floor, you know? But I think as the industry changes, as the media changes, as the world changes, there is going to be a lot more of this, and we just need to be clear about it, you know? But it all has a place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a challenge there, because it comes to trust, I think, of what you're watching. And to your point about how can you trust what a documentary is telling you, even from the most basic thing of like, was this thing fact checked, all the way up to like, was this a, you know, AI recording of somebody's voice that I heard versus an actual quote. So it very much seems like the Wild West of it, especially since we all know nonfiction is becoming more and more popular. Documentaries are more popular. That's going to just attract the attention of the advertisers, of the brands even more, who are going to try to be cutting the corners, stepping their, you know, toe in, or trying to create influence there.
Absolutely. And I think there's a place for us to, as on the creative side, for us to have conversations that draw lines such that hopefully everyone can be happy, but such that there still is integrity involved, which is obviously the hardest thing. But I don't know, that I think that's authenticity and integrity, and making sure that a true story really is a true story in some capacity, or there's some sort of mechanism that says this is not.
Yeah.
It's, that's a whole thing. But I think when there's a will, there's a way, right? And so I think that there are a lot of passionate people thinking about this, and I think that we can do it if we work together.
Agreed. Yeah. Something that I've talked with Nick about a lot. I'm not sure where he got it, but there's this idea of sort of truth and then the higher truth, meaning that, for instance, when you're making a 5-year documentary, there's going to be something that's out of order. You know, you used a B-roll shot that was
Right.
not from that day or whatever it is. Maybe a journalist would call that out and say, well, you can't use that, because it's not factually accurate. But does that discount that as a truthful documentary?
No, not at all. No, not at all. And I'm not like a square like that. I mean, it's like you tell a story, and it also needs to be cinematic, damn it. And move people. And so taking things out of order is great, as long as it moves the story forward. It's just when sometimes people cut things to make people say I mean, we've all cut words, right? But the idea is like bringing the higher truth of the story to light.
So speaking of the higher truth and films, I do want to talk about your film, which it had such an imprint on me. It was so beautiful and so emotional and so deeply personal and intimate. Thank you for making it. It was really, really special. I'd love for first you to just tell the audience here what it's about, and I'd love to hear what it was like to work with your mother as a co-director, and what it was like to put yourself out there in such an intimate story.
Sure. And I'm glad that you watched it, and thank you. And I'm glad that it hit home for you, as we've discussed. So On Our Own Island is the story of a vibrant couple that's deeply in love, as one of them goes from complete health to and through death. And so the death is on camera, as well, a peaceful death at home. And the idea behind the story is that death is hard, and but it can be a beautiful experience and a natural experience. And it also speaks to the idea of love as being this ever powerful thing that kind of never goes away. The twist of the story is that the couple is my parents. And so my dad died, and my parents had this incredible love story, like a very, very much a fairy tale like love story, and were deeply in love and married until his death. And my mom was a journalist, and I am a journalist, video journalist, and when he was diagnosed, we decided as a family that we wanted to just capture. He instigated this and wanted to capture the experience to help other people, as innumerable families and go through things like this. And so we filmed for 2-ish years from his diagnosis through his death. And obviously, when we first started, we thought he was going to beat it and survive, but he didn't. And it was, when I found out that he was diagnosed with cancer, I was actually on one of my first New Yorker shoots, and I was doing a story about birth, and I was following a woman who was super pregnant who was going to give birth. And so it was such an ironic thing. But the film, we made the film, and it has been playing at film festivals around the world. And it's it was the hardest. It was my first feature and the hardest thing that I've ever made, and also the most fulfilling. And we worked on it for 9 years after finishing it, and seeing it on a big screen, surrounded by people in the audience, like these full theaters of people who, watching them watch it was, and then the experiences that they had after, and the sharing that they had after, and how the film affected them, like how they had been afraid of death, and in seeing this, they were no longer afraid, and seeing the power of what love can do, and all of that. It's been really eye-opening and kind of incredible experience. And again, the idea of powerful stories, powerful true stories that can help people and change people, right? Goes back to that. So
It's just such an achievement, and really so beautiful and impactful to anyone. I recommend they should go watch it, find it. Talk about the courage that it took to tell your own story. Sometimes it's not really natural for journalists or filmmakers to point the camera back at themselves or their family, especially in such like a really intimate setting, deeply personal place that you're bringing to the world and all these strangers.
yeah.
What was that like to you? And also I know that you were co-directors with your mom on that. So not only are you filming your family, but you're creatively in the edit, working through all of this material with your mom about your dad. I mean, sounds like such a challenge.
It definitely was quite an adventure. Yeah, I'm a really private person. Like I don't have social media anymore, and and so sharing such a deep and personal part of my life and my family's life definitely was very different. And I, at the same time, I really believe that we're all here. We're all here for a reason, and as my mom says, we all have a special genius, so to speak, to give to the world and help the world. And my dad was a really amazing human and a very giving human, and he wanted his whole experience to have, which was a really beautiful experience. I mean, it was obviously terrible and hard, but he wanted that whole transition to be to help other people, and the bravery that my mom had to be there right with him and to help him, and me too, I guess. I was more behind the camera the whole time because I was shooting it. Was just kind of life-changing and mind-blowing, and to see the world is so screwed up in a lot of ways, and to see the way that they supported each other through this process, and to see the way that my mom kind of rose to the occasion for my dad and was such a guiding light as they kind of went through this major transition together. I think that's something that we can all just aspire to, in a sense. I know you had your dad, right? Also,
Yeah, my stepfather.
your stepfather. I mean, it's like, how do you grappling with this thing is it's like, we talk about the industry, we talk about work and all of that stuff, but this is the shit that everything else falls away.
Yeah,
right.
It's universal. We're all going to face it.
Yeah.
Yet it is ignored by and large in pretty much all conversations.
Totally. And people are afraid to talk about it. People are so afraid of death. They're so afraid of, I think, also deep-seated love in a sense, and being vulnerable and opening one's heart. And this story does that. And also I think it's rare that, or I know it's rare, and I was told that it's a rare thing to have kind of captured a death in the way that it was captured in our film, very up close, but also in a way that isn't scary, and where
Yeah.
people can witness that if they haven't already. And I've heard from lots of different people that they watched it and they were able to help their mom die at home or helped a friend
Mhm.
die more peacefully. And it's a story, but it's also almost like a tool in a sense that gives
Yeah.
people the courage to do their own thing,
Yeah, and I felt when we get to that point of the film, you've built this whole context for it, so it can be seen as something. I don't want to say positive, but something natural, something that is sacred and shouldn't be pushed away and ignored or thrown the curtain over it,
Absolutely.
because it's something we're all headed towards, if we're being honest. So
It's true.
uh, it's worth having conversations and films about for sure.
It's true. And it's a universal story. I mean, when
Yeah.
people have watched it, and I remember we played at the same film festival that Not Going Quietly was at one point, and Nick was there, and I remember having a
Oh,
conversation after he saw it, and we were bonding over this whole experience in a sense. And I mean, we just did. It's like we all are experiencing these kinds of things at some point in our lives, and if we can be real about it and talk about it and face our fears, um, and know that everyone is going through it and we can talk about it, that makes life itself much more meaningful and more enjoyable and fulfilling, you know?
I couldn't agree more. Um, Great. Well, I would love to just bring it back to VC for
Yeah,
just a moment
of
before we
course.
wrap
Of
up.
course.
I wanted to just take this time to ask what is coming next for you guys. What should folks be getting excited about? I know you launched the new website and the forum. That's awesome. I've been checking it out. Just curious how that's been going. And then if folks want to learn more about VC, what should they do? Um, yeah, anything else that you want to wrap up with?
Thanks, Ryder. Yeah. So VC, the Video Consortium, is in a big period of expansion. Lots and lots of cool things on the table, and that we're working on to keep going with. It's videoconsortium.org, and would encourage anyone listening who wants community, a film family, so to speak, a journalism family, and resources and jobs and mentorship and different ways that you can enhance your professional career, so to speak, and also soul as a human being, because we are a little bit warm and fuzzy too. You should become a member. We have a lot of good things in the works, and different ways to support people. And at the same time, we started as a grassroots by filmmakers, for filmmakers, by journalists, for filmmakers, by filmmakers, for filmmakers, and by journalists, for journalists network. And that is still the same. And so we're all about, hearing what people want and using that to keep moving into the future. But a lot of exciting things in the works, and would encourage anyone and everyone to join the community.
Great. Yes, please do. We're excited to go to more screenings in DC and New York. We'd love to host one here at our place too.
That would be great.
And yeah, continue in that spirit of connecting people and learning from each other, and yeah, just uplifting the whole industry.
Absolutely. There's a lot of change that needs to happen, and if we work together, I think, as we are doing, I think those good things will come. So.
Yep, that's right. All right. Thank you, Sky.
Thank you, Ryder. Thanks so much for having me.